Hi guys, tonight's video topic is flowers. We've been talking about plants and we talked about the 4 different divisions of plants, and so focus in on those angiosperms, the flowering plants, and look at the structure of a flower and its importance. So the purpose of flowers is that they're the reproductive organ of angiosperms. Flowers carry the seeds and they make pollen. So remember, seeds are the developing plant embryo, so a little baby plant. So little baby plants are inside of the flowers. They start out as ovules, so like they start out as eggs, and the flower also makes pollen. And as you all fondly remember, pollen is plant sperm. So when the ovule and the pollen combine, you make the embryo inside the seed. And so all that magic is happening in the flowers. So that's why they're so important. And a lot of times, in many cases, flowers are really brightly colored, like these beautiful pink flowers here, so that they attract pollinators. So pollinators are things like this bumblebee or other insects that'll bring the pollen from one flower to another to fertilize an egg on another, an ovule in another flower, so that you have what's called cross pollination, so that there's more genetic diversity when you take the pollen from one plant and combine it with the ovule from a different plant. So that's kind of the purpose of flowers. So now let's get the structures that are inside a flower. It's really pretty cool, and tomorrow in class we're going to dissect a flower, just the kind of dissection I know you all have been hoping for in biology class. But some of the things that we're going to look at are on this diagram here. Look at the words on the left side here. These are all the female parts of the flower. So those female parts together are called the pistil. And the things that make up the pistil are the ovary, so this part here at the bottom. Inside the ovary are the ovules, or the eggs. So those are going to get fertilized and become the seeds with the developing embryo in them. Coming up from the ovary, there's this long tube called the style. And at the end of the style, there's the stigma. And what happens is pollen comes, lands on the stigma, travels down the style into the ovary where the ovules are, fertilizes the ovule, and bam, we have a developing embryo, or in multiples, as you see that there's multiple ovules in there. So this whole deal here, that's the female part of the flower. Then look at the words over on the right side. These are the male parts. So the whole male part together is called the stamen. And it's just basically these stalks with these round parts on the end. And so the stalk is called the filament, and then this round part is called the anther, and that's where the pollen is. And sometimes you'll see flowers with anthers that are really powdery, and that's the pollen that's powdery on them. So that's the male part. And so you'll notice here that the anthers are below the stigma on this flower. So in order for this stamen, right, this male part, the filament and the anther with the pollen on it, to fertilize this female part, for the pollen to come in here at the stigma, go down the style, fertilize the ovules, the pollen would have to go up and over. And that's not quite so likely. More likely, the pollen's going to fall onto a pollinator like an insect or something, or just blow in the wind down here. So there's actually a good reason for that. If the anthers were way up here and the pollen could just fall into its own the flower's own stigma and style, then it's self-pollinating, and that's going to make for less genetic diversity. Whereas if it's blowing away or being carried away to a different flower, that's going to make for greater genetic diversity. So those are the main male and female parts. And then there's a couple other accessory organs, they're sometimes called, and these are the pretty parts. The petals. So here's a petal, and there's a petal over here, and you'll see this word corolla. It's sometimes called, it says corolla here, corolla. All the petals together are called the corolla, and then below the petals are sometimes these little green, they kind of look like leaves, like you might be familiar with the ones on roses, the little green they look like leaves that come off below the petals. Those are called sepals, and all the sepals together make the calyx. The receptacle and the pedicel, it's just the bottom of the flower. Those are words you probably won't see much, so those aren't too important to be familiar with, but definitely to know the petals and the sepals, and then the female parts. The whole thing's called the pistil. Stigma is where the pollen first comes in, goes down the tube of the style, and then ends at the ovary where the ovules are. And then the whole male part is called the stamen. The anther is where the pollen is. The filament is the stalk that holds it up. So now that you know all this, when we come in tomorrow and we get to dissect our flower, you'll be all set to go. So make sure that you have a picture that makes sense to you, that you've drawn and labeled, so that you're familiar with all these parts. Have a great night.